everyone. We are here in Academy Day number 10, celebrating the 10th anniversary of this event, and I'm happy to speak with Rodrigo and Carlos from Neoscape. So welcome, and great presentation by both of you yesterday and today. To get this started, I would like for you to make a short introduction of yourself and your story into the architecture visualization business. Yeah.
All right, I guess I'll go first. Yeah. Well, thank you, Ronen. So my name is Rodrigo Lopez. I am Chief Creative Officer at Neoscape, where I've been for the past almost 17 years. So it's been a long time, and I've loved every day of those 17 years. And I started out in architecture. I studied architecture in school back in the long time ago now, in the late 80s, early 90s, and practiced architecture for a few years. But to me, the thing that always interested me and the thing that I was most passionate about is a bit about what I spoke about today, is the kind of the visual medium as a way to use architecture to communicate something bigger. And to storytell, even though that's nowadays a pretty overused term, maybe in life in general. Everybody has a story to tell, and so I've had the great pleasure of having spoken at events like this over the years. And to me, I always keep coming back to that as a recurring theme, whether it was 15, 16 years ago when I was first getting started, or even over 25 years ago when I was coming out of school. To me, the thing that makes our industry so amazing is that it gives us all an opportunity to do that, to communicate some sort of message. And that message is obviously done in our case for clients, but I like to think that we all put a bit of ourselves in all of our work, and I'm happy to share with everyone here.
Hi, thank you, Ronen, for having us. My name is Carlos Cristerna. I've been working at Neoscape for about 13 years. I also studied architecture back in Mexico. Um, maybe 18 years ago, I forget. And I, d- yeah, and I quickly moved to the U.S. because back in the day in Mexico there was no real archivist industry. It must have had less than 10 years in the U.S. to start with. So it wasn't like I was doing renderings and I was the only weirdo, doing renderings, and I got a lot of heat for it. But regardless, I was convinced of what I wanted, and I was already planning on moving to the U.S. and maybe getting to the VFX industry or some crazy stuff like that. We love movies as artists, and so I moved to the U.S. without really a big plan other than just finding a job as an architectural illustrator. Right, so that's the first thing I did in Washington D.C. I got a job. Now in retrospect, it seemed easy, but it felt very difficult to get a proper job without the right way, getting a visa and all that stuff. Um, and then luck, as I mentioned earlier, had a lot to do with it. I posted my mentor at that job, who is a great illustrator but decided not to pursue that career, is an architect, a partner on that architecture firm. Um, he told me, you need to put your work on such and such websites that will remain unnamed for today's interview. and and back in the day, I didn't even know any of that, right? I didn't know even of the existence of Neoscape. And then someone from Neoscape called me, one of the founders, and short stories, they offered me a job very informally, and I accepted. Well, my wife did for me. I asked her, "Hey, you want to move to Boston?" And she's like, "Yeah, let's go. Let's get out of here." She didn't like living in DC, and that was that. I went into Neoscape not really knowing much about the, other that I was just like seeing in front of me, like I wanted to do renderings, right? So I started doing that at Neoscape in 2006, and the rest is history. I've been there, like Rodrigo, through ups and downs, and super happy to be able to do just what comes to mind on a daily basis, almost, and then to be able to um, do these kind of presentations are to me super. What's the right word? It's more. I think it's more inspirational to me than for other people, because I find it almost odd that people would like to see what we're doing. Where, you know, I mean, okay, here it is. So it's cool. I'm trying to say that I appreciate it a lot. It's super fun, and it's also very fun to be able to flex your creative muscle with your clients, where not to just for the sake of flexing it, but to help them solve a problem. So it never gets old. So it's quite fun.
It's funny what you said. I mentioned to Rodrigo, or I mentioned it to you as well, that seeing the work from Neoscape, for example, back in the early 2000s was kind of one of the catalysts for me to quit architecture and move into architecture visualization. So that was my passion, do the show how a building could look like. And you have a lot of history with the company. So you went through ups and downs, and you have a really broad perspective of what it is that we do. So what can you tell us a little bit about that journey? 17 years, 13 years. Tell us something interesting about a specific struggle point, a specific eureka moment that you had along that path till now.
Do you want to start?
Sure. So, I'll make it personal, and then I'll kind of talk about it from more of a company perspective. I mean, for me, when I came to a point where I realized that the business of architecture was not really what I was interested in. And when you spend, a lot of years, you invest a lot of time in education, and you invest then, as I did, quite a bit of time. I think it was 7+ years working in a firm, and about, came to the point where I was thinking about getting licensed as an architect, to realize that that is not the path, is perhaps I'll call it a little bit troubling. It wasn't that troubling for me, because I think that I also, while I was coming to that realization, I also was coming to the realization of what I really loved to do, and picture making around architecture, I came to realize had been the passion, had been the thing that had kept me even in architecture to begin with. And that remains true today. I think that as a company that's been around, next year will be our 25th anniversary, and as a company that in many ways, kind of helped start an industry that didn't exist, I sort of shared, much like Carlos and colleagues that have been there a long time, share that passion also for kind of diving both feet into the unknown. That's something that I think has always shaped my life, even from childhood through my parents. And, so the challenge to me is always an opportunity. And at Neoscape, I love the fact that, I get to work every day with people that are much more talented than me, much smarter than me. But together we can, solve problems. We can solve problems for our clients, like Carlos said. And at the end of the day, that is what, in retrospect, has driven me, even through architecture school and through working as an architect. And so I'm a generally optimistic person, no matter what. And so for me, it's always been about that. It's those moments where you're kind of wondering, is this the right thing? Knowing that it always feels right is something that I think has driven a lot of the decision making. And the challenges that have come, a lot of them have come through, kind of being part of a growing industry. Some of them have come from just growing as a company. You know, when I started, I think there were a dozen of us, and now there's 85 plus of us, and you know, we've also dealt with financial challenges of, you know, the economy, and we work in an industry, at least in the States, that's very cyclical, right? But even through all that, there's this sort of passion that drives us all to, you know, to use architecture to communicate, you know, messages that we feel are important to the world. So, you know, I think that's a bit of what kind of has shaped me personally, and a bit of how that's also translated into Neoscape, and why Neoscape has always felt like a very natural fit, and continues to be that way.
Yeah, I was saying, being fortunate that back in those days when we experienced that, I've already had working for 2 years in the company. So think about it like that. As a very mature kid or older guy that acted like a kid, and then in 2 years, I'm given a lot of responsibility, a lot more than I actually literally told Niels or someone, "Are you sure you want me to do this?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm expecting you to do that." I'm like, "Okay." So and we grew. We were like 20 something people. We grew up to 60 in about 2 years, and then the next day, it's, back to 20. And I'm generalizing, but it left the appreciation I have for the founders of Neoscape lies based on that experience. I witnessed how they did the very best they could to keep us all in there and to keep paying us and all that. So I know the company has its positives and its negatives, like anything, like any family, like any relationship, like any, and as we grow, we learn and we try to be the best company we can. But that to me is the one that really changed the way I see what we do, and the real value that we put in what we do and why we do it. And I know that it's a little bit of a, out there kind of story, but that's it. To me, that's the moment that really made me stop and start to try to think a little bit more further ahead, and plan for things and be less working, just reacting to the very next thing in front of us. I don't know if that made any sense, but I think that's that.
And maybe the last question, and if I can continue on that note, is if you refer to the company as a family. So, what it is you look for in new members that join the family?
Well, we expect a lot of everyone there. The founders, there's maybe 4 generations you can categorize of the people that work in the company. The founders being the first generation. Then there's the Rodrigos and the Ryan Cohens, myself, people that have like over 10 years working in the company. That have stayed there for a long time and are now in upper management positions, and we used to be doing images. Then there's the art directors who we used to work with and do a lot of production with, but right now they're the ones managing the whole production teams. And then there's the younger generation of artists. Of all of them, I think, or all of us, the expectation is an extremely strong work ethic beyond more importantly than talent. I think um, critical thinking of any kind, because I think at the end of the day, the value of what we sell is not in the image itself, but the effort put behind it, and what is it trying to convey or solve for our clients. I think that's it. I expect of people just hard work, and just passion for doing what they do. And we do the best we can to make it less hard, but sometimes it's not possible. I don't know. That's from my perspective.
So, simply put, I think we look for people. I mean, I personally, and I think we as a company do, we look for people that are smarter. There's way more talented artists out there today than I ever was, and I love finding those people. We love finding those people. And I think, one of the other things that we look for, obviously hard work is important, but I think we look for people that question, people that are curious, people that have that sort of inquisitive streak in them, because that's ultimately what motivates us every day. We I don't want to do the same thing that I did yesterday. I don't want, our next project to be just like the other project that we've worked on. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to rip up what you've done and, in some ways start over. And every project, I think is an opportunity to do that. And doing that while also staying in business and making sure that, you can pay people and, is challenging. But it's that tension, I think, that ultimately is what keeps us motivated and what makes us love doing what we do.
Thank you very much. That was very inspiring, and we'll see you in the next interview.